Okay, so you were sort of a visiting fellow on Barry Weiss's Substack, and wrote this barn burner of a report after speaking to a woman, I think you called her Lauren in the piece, who's a med student at a top medical school, who was telling you how concerned she was about woke ideology infecting medicine. I mean, actual science, in a way that is really disturbing, including no longer willing to acknowledge the very real differences in health issues between men and women, something women and their advocates have been trying to push for greater attention to for decades.
Yeah, that's sort of the irony here, is that after decades of women arguing that our health issues are not focused on, there's now this unfortunately sort of progressive movement away from that, where gender identity it's become this sacrosanct concept. So gender identity has become more important in some places than biological sex. Mm-hmm. And so the student I spoke to, this was at a top school at the University of California system. She told me that her professors will essentially get shamed by their own students if they talk about biological sex. And she had lots of documentation to back this up. She sent me audio of a professor profusely apologizing to his students for offending his students. He sounded like he was about to cry. And the offensive term that he used in his lecture was pregnant women.
So absurd. And it's not just him, because just this week we saw the CDC use the term pregnant people. All the media seems to be going along with it now. I saw you tweet out something like, is this like a new style acceptance that we're no longer going to use the term women anymore, anywhere? Because is NPR, I think ABC, a few publications just went along with it.
A lot of publications have gone along with it, and it's happened remarkably quickly. It sort of reminds me of the adoption of the term Latinx, and there's been polling on that term, and most people who are considered Latinx by the media either don't know what that term is or don't like that term. Right. And I think the same thing is happening here, and I haven't seen any polling on the term pregnant people versus pregnant women, but just intuitively, there is something very bizarre about this erasure of women within women's health. And yes, It's not just the CDC, it's not just the media, it's organizations like Planned Parenthood, which, should be able to use the term women without consequence. It's very strange.
So it's to the point of like the danger that's being posed now. This is, I think this is from your report. In 2019, the New England Journal of Medicine reported the case of a 32-year-old transgender man so biological female. Yeah. Who went to an ER complaining of abdominal pain. And tell us what happened.
So this patient was assessed as an obese man suffering from complications of hypertension. He'd quit taking his hypertension medication because he identified himself as a trans man. His practitioners, the nurses in charge of him, they didn't realize, this woman in particular didn't realize what was going on. And it turned out he was pregnant. And by the time they figured out what was happening, it was too late and the baby was gone. And according to this report in the New England Journal of Medication, while this man had no idea that he was pregnant, he was really devastated by this. And something sort of the opposite of that has happened recently. A trans person is suing a hospital because a trans man is suing a hospital because he was given a pregnancy test, and this
is in Rochester, New York, right? This is near my neck of the woods.
Yeah. So this was considered very offensive to him, and I can understand. So
he's a biological female. He's in the hospital, but he lives his life as a man, and they want to give him a pregnancy test.
Right. And this patient says that his practitioners didn't use his preferred pronouns. I think that's wrong. But if there's not an acknowledgement of biological sex, practitioners are going to miss things. Things are different with men and women when it comes to medication. Dosages are different from different medications. Symptoms are different from different conditions. A female heart attack doesn't look like a male heart attack. And so in a case like this, you can see why the practitioners would want to give everybody who is a female person a pregnancy test, because if you're, like, let's say, undergoing anesthesia They need to know, and it can be a liability for these doctors if somebody ends up being pregnant. So I think there's a pretty easy solution here. Really, you can respect people's gender identity, you can respect their pronouns, you can call them the name and the pronouns that they want, but you also need to indicate what their biological sex is.
Yes.
And my wife is a nurse in Seattle, and at her hospital they have stopped marking down biological sex on intake forms. So what you get is gender identity. It's incredibly dangerous. And the thing is, like, this is done out of, I think, some real sensitivity. People are trying to be inclusive. They are trying to do the right thing, but there are consequences to this. And these consequences could end up hurting people, end up hurting trans people, which is going to have the opposite of the intended effect.
Well, and even if you took the hardcore attitude of, well, it's only the trans community that's going to hurt itself by imposing these crazy rules on people. Right. It's not true. So, because first of all, the activists do not speak for the majority of trans people who are kind and loving and don't want to follow all these nonsense rules or make the rest of us do it. And the second thing is, what about that baby? Do we care about the baby who died because of this crazy PC nonsense? Yes, we do.